What would you do if you found a contract offering you $3 million to carry your boss's child? 9 pages. Your name on it. Sitting on the kitchen counter of a billionaire's penthouse. That's what happened to Elena, his maid. But here's the twist. He didn't want an heir. He was in love with her since day one, and too afraid to say it. Stay with me. This story will break your heart and put it back together. Elena found the contract on a Tuesday, tucked inside a leather folder that had no business being on the kitchen counter. She was wiping down the marble, slow, circular motions, the way she always did after Alexander left for the office. When her knuckle brushed the edge of the folder and it slid open like a mouth confessing a sin it had been holding for too long, she should have closed it. She knew that. The rules of the Blackwell penthouse were simple and unspoken. Clean everything, touch nothing that matters. But Elena's eyes caught her own name on the second page, typed in cold serif font beneath a clause titled, Obligations of the Appointed Party, and her hand stopped moving. The cloth dripped onto the marble. She didn't notice. She read it standing up, all 9 pages. Her lips moved slightly with certain words. Heir, compensation, confidentiality, termination, as if tasting something she couldn't quite identify. The document was a pregnancy contract. Alexander Richard Blackwell, Party A, was offering Elena Sofia Moreno, Party B, the sum of $3 million to carry his child. The terms were surgical, prenatal care covered, living arrangements upgraded, a private wing of the penthouse designated for her use during gestation. And at the end, after delivery, full custody transferred to Party A. Party B would sign a non-disclosure agreement and disappear from the child's life with her check and her silence. Elena set the folder down exactly where she found it. She adjusted its angle to match the faint dust outline on the counter. She rinsed the cloth, wrung it twice, draped it over the faucet the way she always did. Then she stood there for a long moment, her hands gripping the edge of the sink, her knuckles whitening, staring at the skyline of Manhattan through the floor-to-ceiling windows. 47 floors up. The city looked like a circuit board from here, cold, electric, indifferent. She didn't cry. She didn't run. She picked up her phone, checked the time, and went back to cleaning the guest bathroom. That evening, Alexander came home at 7:15. She heard the elevator chime, then his footsteps. Always the same rhythm. Confident but unhurried, like a man who had never been late to anything that mattered to him. He walked through the living room, loosening his tie with one hand, his jacket already off, draped over his forearm with the precision of someone who had been taught since childhood that clothes should never wrinkle. "Good evening, Mr. Blackwell." Her voice came out exactly as it always did, neutral, professional. A voice designed to be heard and immediately forgotten. He stopped. Not because her greeting was unusual. She said the same thing every night. But because tonight, for reasons he couldn't name, the sound of it landed differently. He looked at her. She was folding towels by the hallway closet, her dark hair pulled into its usual low bun, the gray uniform pressed and spotless, the small silver crucifix resting in the hollow of her throat. She didn't look up. Elena. He said her name the way he said it every evening, but his fingers tightened around the tie he was holding. "Everything all right today?" "Yes, sir. Dinner is on the counter. The dry cleaning is in your closet. Dr. Kessler's office confirmed your Thursday appointment." "Thank you." He stood there 2 seconds longer than necessary. She felt it, the weight of his gaze on the side of her face, but she kept folding. Crease, fold, stack, crease, fold, stack. He walked away. His bedroom door closed with a soft click. Elena exhaled. She had worked for Alexander Blackwell for 11 months. In that time, she had learned the architecture of his loneliness the way she had learned the layout of his penthouse, by moving through it quietly, every day, until she knew where every shadow fell. He ate dinner alone. He slept in a king-sized bed that looked like it had never been touched on the left side. He received calls from his mother, Victoria, every Sunday at 10, and after each one he would stand by the window for exactly 12 minutes, his jaw set, his hands in his pockets, saying nothing. He had a best friend, Daniel Foster, the lawyer, who visited on Fridays with a bottle of whiskey and what sounded like genuine concern. And he had Nina, his assistant, who managed his calendar with military precision but never once asked him how he was doing. Elena noticed all of this not because she was curious but because she was invisible. And invisible people see everything. What she hadn't noticed, what she had refused to notice, were the other things. The way his hand would hover near her shoulder when he passed behind her in the kitchen, close enough to feel the heat but never making contact. The way he kept fresh peonies in the hallway vase after she once mentioned they reminded her of her grandmother's garden in Puebla. The way his eyes tracked her when she crossed the living room, not with the gaze of a man inspecting his employee's work, but with the desperate attention of someone memorizing something he was terrified of losing. She hadn't noticed. Or maybe she had, and she had filed it in the same locked drawer where she kept every feeling that could cost her this job, this paycheck. This fragile stability she had built with her bare hands after crossing into this country, with nothing but her brother Rico's phone number and a promise that she would never go back. Now, standing in her small rented room in Queens, still smelling of the lavender cleaning spray from the Blackwell penthouse, Elena pulled the elastic from her hair and let it fall around her shoulders. She stared at herself in the cracked bathroom mirror. The face staring back was tired, beautiful, and absolutely furious. $3 million. That was her price. He had quantified her, reduced the thing growing in the air between them, the tension, the almost touches, the stolen glances that neither of them ever acknowledged, into clauses and subclauses and a number with 6 zeros. She should quit. She should call Rico, tell him everything, let him drive to Manhattan and do something stupid and protective. She should walk away and never look back. But Elena Moreno didn't survive what she had survived by doing what she should. She turned off the bathroom light, lay on her bed in the dark, and made a decision that she would not understand the full weight of until much later. She would go back tomorrow. She would say nothing about the contract. And she would wait. Not for him to explain, but for herself to understand why the anger burning in her chest was tangled so tightly with something else. Something that felt like the phantom heat of a hand that had never quite touched her shoulder. 3 days passed and Elena said nothing. She cleaned the penthouse with the same precision, the same silence, the same invisible choreography she had perfected over 11 months. But something had shifted beneath the surface, a tectonic plate of awareness that changed the geography of every interaction without moving a single visible thing. She noticed everything now. Not the way she used to notice, passively, the way furniture absorbs light, but actively, deliberately, the way a woman notices when she knows she is being wanted. Wednesday morning. Alexander was late leaving for the office. He stood in the kitchen drinking his coffee black, his cuff still unbuttoned, his hair not yet fully tamed from sleep. Elena was cleaning the stovetop 3 feet away from him. The space between them hummed like a wire pulled too tight. Elena. Yes, Mr. Blackwell. You've been quiet. She almost laughed. She was always quiet. Quiet was the job description. Quiet was the uniform she wore underneath the gray dress and the white apron. But she understood what he meant. There was a different quality to her silence now, and he had felt it the way animals feel a change in barometric pressure before a storm. I'm the same as always, sir. He set his coffee mug on the counter. She watched his hand, long fingers, the signet ring on his pinky catching the morning light, the faint scar on his left eyebrow that she had never asked about. His hand rested on the marble 6 inches from hers, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his skin. Neither of them moved. You'd tell me, he said slowly, if something were wrong. It wasn't a question. It was a plea dressed in the syntax of authority, and Elena recognized it because she had spent her whole life translating the things powerful people couldn't say into the things they meant. She looked up. Their eyes met, and for one unguarded second, Alexander Blackwell's face betrayed him completely. She saw it, raw, unarmored, terrified, the face of a man standing on the edge of something he had built with legal language and financial projections because he didn't know how to build it with words. The face of a man who had written a contract because he couldn't write a love letter. Then the mask slid back into place. He picked up his mug, buttoned his cuffs, and walked toward the elevator without another word. Elena's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the cold marble and held them there until they stopped. That Friday, Daniel Foster arrived at 7 with a bottle of Macallan 18 and the easy smile he always wore like a well-tailored coat. Elena opened the door for him, took his jacket, and disappeared into the kitchen to prepare the glasses. 2 tumblers, no ice for Alexander, 1 cube for Daniel, a small plate of dark chocolate on the side. She had done this ritual dozens of times. But tonight, as she carried the tray into the study, she caught a fragment of conversation that turned her blood cold. "You haven't given her the contract yet?" Daniel's voice was low but sharp, the voice of a lawyer who had drafted something he disagreed with. "I will." "Alex, it's been 2 weeks since I finalized it. You asked me to write the most airtight surrogacy agreement in the state of New York, and I did, against my better judgment, I might add. And now you're telling me it's been sitting in a folder on your kitchen counter like a takeout menu? I said I will. You won't." Daniel leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his glasses reflecting the amber light from the desk lamp. "Because this was never about an heir, and we both know it. Your mother wants a grandchild to secure the Blackwell Trust. Fine. But you could have hired any surrogate agency in the country. You could have had this done anonymously, clinically, without ever involving—" "Don't!" The single word landed like a door slamming. Elena stood frozen in the hallway, the tray balanced in her hands, her heartbeat so loud she was certain they could hear it through the wall. Daniel's voice softened. "How long, Alex?" Silence. "How long have you been in love with her?" The ice in the glass cracked, or maybe that was something inside Alexander's chest. When he spoke, his voice was so low that Elena had to stop breathing to hear it. "Since the first morning. She came in, she cleaned the kitchen, she arranged the flowers, and she left without looking at me once. Everyone looks at me, Daniel. Everyone wants something. She just didn't. And I have been ruined ever since." Elena's grip on the tray tightened until the glasses clinked softly against each other. She took 1 step back, then another, retreating to the kitchen on silent feet. She set the tray on the counter and pressed both hands over her mouth. Since the first morning, 11 months. He had watched her for 11 months, and instead of speaking, he had commissioned a legal document. The contract wasn't cold, it was the opposite. It was the most desperate, most cowardly, most tragically misguided love letter ever written, and it was addressed to her. She served them the whiskey 10 minutes later, her face composed, her hands steady, her eyes revealing nothing. Alexander thanked her without looking up. Daniel watched her leave the room with an expression she couldn't read, something between guilt and admiration. That night, after Daniel left and Alexander retreated to his bedroom, Elena cleaned the study. She picked up the 2 tumblers, wiped the rings of condensation from the desk, and shelved the bottle. As she turned to leave, her eye caught something on Alexander's desk that she had never seen before. A photograph, small and unframed, tucked under the base of the desk lamp. It showed Elena in the hallway of the penthouse, caught in a moment she didn't remember. She was standing by the window with a vase of peonies in her arms, the late afternoon light turning her skin to gold, her hair half loose from its bun, a rare, unguarded smile on her lips. He had kept this, hidden it like a secret. A man with a penthouse full of million-dollar art had tucked a stolen photograph of his maid under a lamp like a teenager, hiding a love note. Elena picked up the photo, studied it for a long moment, then placed it back exactly where she found it. She turned off the study light and walked to the elevator. The doors closed. She descended 47 floors in silence. When she reached the lobby, she pulled out her phone and called her brother. "Rico." Her voice cracked for the first time in 3 days. "I need to see you. Tomorrow. Don't ask why." On the other end, Ricardo Moreno heard something in his sister's voice that he hadn't heard since the night she crossed the border. Not fear, not sadness, but the particular tremor of a woman who has just discovered that the ground she built her life on is not as solid as she believed. "I'll be there," he said. "Wherever you need me." Elena hung up. stepped out into the Manhattan night and let the cold air hit her face like a slap she needed. 47 floors above her, Alexander Blackwell stood at his window, watching a figure he couldn't quite see disappear into the crowd below. His forehead rested against the glass. His breath fogged a small circle on the window, and in the brief moment before it faded, he traced a shape in it with his fingertip. He erased it before it could become anything recognizable. But his hand was shaking. Rico was already sitting at the corner booth of the diner in Queens when Elena arrived Saturday morning. He had a cup of coffee in front of him that he hadn't touched, and his calloused hands were flat on the table the way they always were when he was bracing for something. He was wearing his usual flannel shirt, work jeans, boots still dusted with construction site concrete, and when Elena slid into the seat across from him, he studied her face with the careful intensity of a man who had been reading his little sister's silences since she was 6 years old. "Talk to me," he said. Elena told him everything. The contract, the 9 pages, the $3 million, the clause about custody, the clause about silence. She told him about Alexander's hand that never quite touched her shoulder, the peonies that appeared after a single comment, the photograph hidden under the lamp. She told him what she had overheard Daniel say. She told him what Alexander had confessed when he thought no one was listening. Since the first morning, Rico's jaw tightened with each detail. His fingers curled into fists on the table, then released, then curled again. When she finished, he sat in silence for a long moment, staring at the coffee he still hadn't touched. "I'm going to kill him." "Rico." "I'm serious, Elena. This man, this rich, entitled, he thinks he can write up a contract to buy you? To buy a baby from you like you're some kind of... He hasn't offered it to me yet." Her voice was steady, but her eyes were fierce. "I found it. He doesn't know I found it. And I need you to listen to me, not react. I need my brother right now, not my bodyguard." Rico exhaled through his nose like a bull being told to stand down. He picked up his coffee, drank half of it in one gulp, and set it down hard enough to rattle the saucer. "Fine, I'm listening. I'm not quitting." "Elena, I said I'm not quitting. Not yet. Not until I understand what this is." She leaned forward, her voice dropping. "He could have gone to any agency. Daniel said it himself. He could have done this without me ever knowing. But he didn't. He wrote my name on that contract, Rico. Mine. And then he left it on the counter like he wanted me to find it, or like he was too afraid to hide it, or too afraid to give it to me, or I don't know. I don't know what it means yet. But I'm going to find out." Rico stared at her for a long time. Then he shook his head slowly, a bitter smile pulling at the corner of his mouth. "You always were the stubborn one. Mama used to say you got it from Papa. I think you got it from the devil." Elena didn't smile, but some of the tension left her shoulders. She reached across the table and squeezed her brother's hand. His rough fingers closed around hers and held on like he was afraid the current might take her. "If he hurts you," Rico said quietly, "I don't care how many floors up he lives. I will find him. I know. And if you need to leave, any hour, any day, you call me and I'm there. I know that too." They sat in the diner for another hour, talking about small things, his construction job, the leak in his apartment ceiling, a girl he had met at a bodega who laughed at his bad English. Normal things, human things, things that existed in a world where people didn't draft legal contracts to avoid saying "I love you." Monday morning arrived like a held breath finally released. Elena entered the penthouse at 6:30, changed into her uniform in the small staff bathroom near the service entrance, pulled her hair into its low bun, and began her routine. Coffee prepared, counters wiped, flowers refreshed. Peonies again, she noticed, always peonies. Alexander emerged from his bedroom at 7:15. He was dressed sharper than usual, the black shirt, the gray trousers, the Oxford shoes. But there was something different in the way he carried himself. A tension in his shoulders, a hesitation in his walk. He entered the kitchen and stopped when he saw her, as if he had forgotten she would be there, which was absurd because she was always there. "Good morning, Mr. Blackwell." "Good morning, Elena." He poured his coffee. She continued arranging the flowers. The silence between them was a living thing now, thick and electric, pressing against the walls of the kitchen like a gas leak, waiting for a spark. "I need to speak with you about something." His voice came out measured, rehearsed. He was gripping the coffee mug with both hands. "This evening, if you have a moment, after your shift." Elena's hands paused on the peonies. 1 heartbeat. 2. She resumed arranging. "Of course, sir." He nodded once, set down the mug he hadn't drunk from, and left for the office. The elevator doors closed. Elena stood motionless in the kitchen for a full minute, then reached into the vase and adjusted a single peony that was already perfectly placed. He was going to give her the contract. Tonight. The hours that followed were the longest of Elena's life. She cleaned the penthouse with mechanical precision: guest bathroom, master suite, study, living room, hallway. But her mind was a war zone. She rehearsed responses she would never say. She imagined slamming the contract on his desk and telling him exactly what she thought of a man who quantified human beings. She imagined walking out and never coming back. She imagined, in a place she would never admit existed, saying yes. At 4 in the afternoon, Nina arrived to drop off documents for Alexander's home office. The assistant was efficient as always, ponytail tight, tablet in hand, heels clicking with purpose. She set a garment bag on the living room couch and turned to Elena. "Mr. Blackwell asked me to leave this for you." Nina's tone was neutral, professional, but her eyes lingered on Elena's face a fraction too long. "He said you would understand." Nina left. Elena stared at the garment bag for a long time before unzipping it. Inside was a dress. Deep red silk, the color of wine held up to candlelight. The fabric slid through her fingers like water, cool, impossibly soft, alive. The cut was elegant and devastating, a neckline that suggested without revealing, a back that opened like a whispered invitation, a hem that would fall to her ankles. There were no accessories, no shoes, no jewelry. Just the dress alone in its bag, as if it were enough, as if it were everything. A small card was tucked into the interior pocket. Alexander's handwriting, sharp, angular, impatient, read, "There is a charity gala at the Whitfield Hotel this Saturday. I would like you to attend, not as my employee. A.B." Elena read the card 3 times. She held the dress against her body and caught her reflection in the hallway mirror. Gray uniform, white apron, hair pulled back, crucifix at her throat. And over it all, the red silk cascading like a second skin she hadn't earned, hadn't asked for, and couldn't stop touching. She hung the dress in the staff bathroom and closed the door. Then she sat on the edge of the bathtub and pressed her palms against her eyes until the pressure behind them subsided. At 7:30, Alexander came home. Elena heard the elevator, the footsteps, the familiar rhythm. But tonight there was something else. A pause before he entered the living room, as if he were gathering himself. When he appeared, his tie was already loosened, his jacket over his arm, and his blue-gray eyes found her immediately with an intensity that made the air between them feel combustible. Did Nina bring? Yes. Silence. He stood on one side of the living room. She stood on the other. 20 feet of Italian marble between them, and not nearly enough. "Elena, I need to be honest with you about something." He took a step forward. His voice was different now, stripped of its usual authority, raw at the edges, as if the words were being pulled from somewhere he had kept locked for a long time. "There is a document, a contract. I asked Daniel to draft it months ago, and I have been trying to find the right moment to. I know about the contract." The words left her mouth like a blade cutting silk. Clean, irreversible. Alexander's face went white, not pale, white. The kind of white that happens when blood retreats from the surface because the body is redirecting every resource toward survival. I found it last Tuesday, on the counter. I read all 9 pages. Elena's voice was calm, but her hands, hidden at her sides, were trembling. "I know what you're offering. I know the terms. I know the number. Alexander opened his mouth and nothing came out. She had never seen him speechless. She had never seen him look so utterly exposed, as if she had walked into his chest and turned on every light in a house he had kept dark for years. "Why didn't you say something?" he finally managed. "Why didn't you?" The question hit him like a physical thing. He flinched. Actually flinched. This man who negotiated billion-dollar deals across boardroom tables without blinking. And Elena saw it happen, saw the crack spread across the surface of Alexander Blackwell like a fracture in ice. And she understood in that moment that she held more power in this room than he did. More power than his money, his name, his penthouse, his 9-page contract. Because she knew the truth, and he didn't know she knew. And now that the gap was closed, they were standing on level ground for the first time since she had walked into his life 11 months ago. "I heard you talking to Daniel." She took a step forward. Her voice dropped not to a whisper but to something more dangerous. A controlled, deliberate quietness that demanded he listen with every part of himself. "I heard what you said. Since the first morning. Is that true?" Alexander's throat moved. His hand found the back of the nearest chair and gripped it like an anchor. "Yes." "Then why a contract, Alexander?" She used his first name for the first time, and it landed between them like a match on gasoline. "Why lawyers and clauses and $3 million? Why not just, because I don't know how." The words broke from him like something caged and finally released. He stepped toward her, and for the first time his composure was completely gone. His eyes were glassy. His voice shook. "I don't know how to do this, Elena. I know how to acquire companies and structure deals and manage portfolios. I know how to make my mother stop talking and how to make a room full of investors believe anything I say. But I don't know how to stand in front of you and say what I don't have the language for it. So I use the only language I know. And I know how that sounds. I know what that makes me. It makes you a coward." He absorbed the word without defending himself. His eyes stayed on hers, and in them, she saw something she had never seen in any man who had ever held power over her, the willingness to be wounded. "Yes," he said. "It does." The room was silent. Manhattan glittered 47 floors below them, indifferent and enormous, and in this glass box suspended above it all, 2 people stood close enough to touch and too terrified to move. Elena reached into the pocket of her apron and pulled out the small card from the garment bag. She held it up between 2 fingers. "Not as your employee," she read aloud. She looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time she let him see what was behind her composure. Not anger, not submission. Something far more dangerous to both of them. Then as what? Alexander's lips parted. His hand released the chair. He took one more step toward her, closing the distance to something intimate and terrifying, and when he spoke, his voice was barely audible. "As whatever you'll let me be." Elena held his gaze for 5 long seconds. Then she folded the card, slipped it back into her apron pocket, and stepped back. "I haven't decided yet," she said. And then quieter, in a voice meant only for the space between them, she added, "But I'm keeping the dress." She turned and walked toward the service entrance. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. She could feel his eyes on her like sunlight on bare skin, and for the first time in 11 months she let herself feel it without flinching. Behind her, Alexander Blackwell stood alone in his living room, his hand still hovering in the air where the chair had been, his heart hammering against his ribs like something trying to escape. And on his face, visible to no one, was the expression of a man who had just been given something he didn't deserve and knew it. Hope. Saturday arrived the way all inevitable things do. Slowly, then all at once. Elena spent the morning at Rico's apartment in the Bronx, sitting on his kitchen counter while he paced the small room like a caged animal, gesturing with a spatula he had forgotten he was holding. "You're going to a gala, with him, in a dress he bought you." Rico stopped pacing and pointed the spatula at her. "Elena, this is exactly how these stories end badly. Rich man, poor girl, fancy dress, One magic night and then, this isn't a fairy tale, Rico. No, it's worse. Fairy tales have rules. This man makes his own rules and prints them on legal paper. He set the spatula down and leaned against the counter beside her, his shoulder touching hers. His voice dropped. Are you sure about this? Elena stared at the cracked ceiling of her brother's apartment. A water stain in the corner looked like a map of somewhere she had never been. No, she said honestly. But I need to see who he is outside that penthouse, outside the contract. I need to know if the man I heard talking to Daniel, the one who said since the first morning, is real, or if he's just another version of the mask. Rico was quiet for a long time. Then he put his arm around her shoulders, pulled her close, and kissed the top of her head the way he used to when she was small and afraid of thunderstorms. You call me if anything feels wrong. Anything. I don't care if you're in the middle of the dance floor surrounded by billionaires. You call me and I come get you. In what? Your pickup truck with the broken taillight? I'll park it right in front of the hotel. Let them tow it. She laughed. A real laugh. The kind that started in her belly and broke through the tension like sunlight through storm clouds. And for a moment, sitting in that tiny kitchen in the Bronx, she felt like herself again. Not Party B, not the maid, just Elena. At 6 that evening, she stood in front of the mirror in her rented room in Queens and put on the red dress. The silk moved against her skin like a whispered confession. She let her hair fall loose, the dark waves cascading over her shoulders, the copper highlights catching the fading light from the window. She clasped the silver crucifix at her throat, the only accessory she needed, the only one that meant anything. She applied lipstick the color of the dress, a shade darker than anything she had ever worn, and when she looked at her reflection, she barely recognized the woman staring back. Not because the dress changed her, because the dress revealed what the gray uniform had been hiding for 11 months. Strength, fire. A beauty that wasn't decorative but structural, built into the bones of a woman who had crossed borders, scrubbed floors, and kept her dignity intact through every humiliation poverty could design. The car arrived at 7. Thomas, the driver, opened the door for her with a nod that contained, for the first time, something that looked like respect. The drive to the Whitfield Hotel took 40 minutes through Saturday evening traffic, and Elena spent every one of them watching Manhattan transform outside the window, the bodegas and laundromats of Queens giving way to the gleaming towers of Midtown, the streets narrowing and then widening, the lights multiplying until the city looked like it was made entirely of electricity and ambition. The Whitfield Hotel was a monument to the kind of wealth that doesn't need to announce itself. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls above a ballroom that smelled of orchids and old money. Women in gowns that cost more than Elena's annual salary moved through the space like silk-wrapped planets, orbiting men in tuxedos who held champagne flutes with the casual grip of people who had never worried about dropping anything in their lives. Elena stepped into the ballroom and every cell in her body told her she didn't belong. The marble floor was too polished. The laughter was too practiced. The air was too perfumed. She was a foreign body in a closed system, and she could feel the antibodies mobilizing, the sidelong glances, the micro pauses in conversation, the quick inventory of her dress, her shoes, her skin, her worth. Then she saw Alexander. He was standing near the bar, talking to a group of men in identical black tuxedos, but his body was angled toward the entrance as if he had been tracking the door all evening. The moment she appeared, his sentence stopped mid-word. His hand froze around his glass. The men around him continued talking, oblivious, but Alexander Blackwell had left the conversation entirely. He was looking at her the way astronomers look at phenomena they have spent their careers theorizing about and never expected to actually witness. He crossed the room. Not quickly, deliberately. Each step measured, intentional, as if he was giving her time to change her mind, to turn around, to disappear back into the world where she was invisible and safe. But Elena didn't move. She stood at the edge of the ballroom in her red dress with her grandmother's crucifix at her throat, and she held her ground. You came. His voice was barely above a whisper. He stood in front of her, close enough that she could smell his cologne, sandalwood, leather, something warm underneath, and see the slight tremor in his jaw. I said I was keeping the dress. It seemed wasteful not to wear it. The faintest smile crossed his face. Not the controlled boardroom smile she was used to, but something fragile and genuine and slightly bewildered, as if he couldn't believe his own luck. You look... Don't. She held up one finger, and the gesture stopped him cold. Don't say anything you've said to other women in other dresses at other galas. If you're going to say something, make it something you've never said before. Alexander looked at her for a long moment. The ballroom swirled around them. Music, laughter, champagne, crystal. But they existed in a pocket of silence that belonged only to them. I'm terrified of you, he said. Elena blinked. Of all the things she had prepared herself to hear, that was not one of them. Good, she said. And she took his arm. The next 2 hours were a kind of dream. The dangerous kind. The kind you don't want to wake from even when you sense the edges fraying. Alexander introduced her to no one by title. Not my assistant, not my guest, not my anything. Just Elena. First name only, offered without explanation, as if she needed no context to justify her presence. And Elena, who had spent 11 months learning the art of invisibility, discovered something intoxicating about being seen. They danced once. A slow, formal waltz that the band played with the precision of a Swiss watch. Alexander's hand on her lower back, the first time he had touched her with intention, with permission, burned through the silk like a brand. She felt his heartbeat through his jacket, faster than the music, and she knew with absolute certainty that this man, for all his billions and boardrooms and controlled composure, was completely at her mercy. She was deciding what to do with that knowledge when Victoria arrived. The older woman entered the ballroom the way a blade enters a wound, smoothly, precisely, and with the clear intention of causing damage. She was wearing cream from head to toe, her pearl necklace double-wrapped, her blonde hair immaculate, her blue eyes scanning the room until they landed on her son and the woman in red standing close enough to breathe his air. Victoria crossed the ballroom floor in 12 seconds. Elena counted. Alexander. Victoria's voice was champagne poured over ice, sparkling, cold, capable of cracking glass. She did not look at Elena. She looked through her, the way one looks through a window to assess the weather. I wasn't aware you were bringing staff to the gala. The word staff landed like a slap delivered with a silk glove. Around them, 3 or 4 nearby guests paused their conversations with the practiced subtlety of people who recognize the opening notes of a public humiliation. Alexander's jaw tightened. Mother. Mrs. Blackwell. Elena spoke before Alexander could finish. Her voice was clear, unhurried, and pitched with the quiet authority of a woman who had survived things that would have broken Victoria Blackwell before breakfast. My name is Elena Moreno. I'm here tonight because your son invited me. Not as staff. Victoria's gaze finally landed on Elena, and the temperature between them dropped 10 degrees. She looked at the dress, assessed its quality, its cut, its cost, and then she looked at Elena's face with the expression of a jeweler examining a stone she suspected was fake. I know exactly who you are, dear. Victoria's smile was a masterpiece of cruelty wrapped in courtesy. You're the girl who cleans my son's toilets, and I must say that's a lovely dress. Alexander has always been generous with his charity. The silence that followed was a living thing. Elena felt it press against her chest, felt the eyes of 50 guests burning into her skin, felt the old familiar shame, the shame of being poor, being foreign, being less, rise in her throat like bile. For one terrible second, she was 12 years old again, standing in a borrowed uniform on her first day at a school where every other child had parents who could afford lunch. Then the second passed, and Elena Moreno remembered who she was. Mrs. Blackwell, she said, her voice steady as bedrock. I have cleaned your son's penthouse for 11 months. I have cleaned his floors, his windows, his bathrooms, and his kitchen. I have done it with dignity, with skill, and without complaint. I have never stolen, I have never lied. I have never asked for anything that wasn't earned, and the only thing in that penthouse that has ever been beneath me is the dirt I swept off the floor." She paused, letting the words settle like stones in still water. "So, with all due respect, I will not be spoken to as though I am something to be scraped off the bottom of your shoe. Not by you, not by anyone, not tonight." The ballroom held its breath. Victoria's smile calcified on her face. Alexander stood rigid beside Elena, his hand still on her back, and in his eyes was something that looked like awe. The stunned, reverent awe of a man watching someone do with bare hands what he had never managed with all his power. Victoria recovered quickly. She always did. She turned to Alexander with the precision of a chess player sacrificing a pawn to protect the queen. "We need to talk. Privately. Now." She turned and walked toward the hotel corridor without waiting for an answer. Alexander looked at Elena. His eyes asked a question his mouth couldn't form. She answered it by gently removing his hand from her back and stepping away. "Go," she said. "I'll be here." He followed his mother. Elena stood alone in the ballroom, surrounded by strangers in expensive clothes, and she realized her hands were shaking. Not from fear. From the adrenaline of having said for the first time in her adult life exactly what she meant. Exactly when it mattered. To exactly the person who needed to hear it. She picked up a glass of champagne from a passing tray. She didn't drink it. She just held it, because she needed something to do with her hands while she waited for the world to either open up or close down. In the corridor, Victoria's composure crumbled the moment they were alone. She grabbed Alexander's arm with a grip that was stronger than her manicured hand suggested. "Have you lost your mind?" "Mother, a maid. Alexander, a maid. Do you have any idea what the board will say? What the press will do? The Blackwell name has survived recessions, scandals, and your father's death. But it will not survive you parading a housekeeper around in designer silk like some. Be very careful how you finish that sentence." Alexander's voice was quiet, but it carried the unmistakable weight of a man who had reached a limit he didn't know he had. Victoria stopped. Not because she was afraid of her son. Victoria Blackwell had never been afraid of anyone. But because she recognized something in his eyes that she had only seen once before. In her husband's eyes. The night he told her he would give up everything for her. The night before they eloped against both their families' wishes. The night she had chosen love over legacy and never admitted to anyone that she would do it again. The recognition hit her like a ghost walking through her body. "She is not one of us," Victoria whispered, but the conviction had drained from her voice. "No," Alexander said. "She's better than us. She's better than every person in that ballroom, including you and me. And the only reason you can't see it is because you've spent so long looking down that you've forgotten what people look like at eye level." Victoria's hand fell from his arm. She stood in the hotel corridor, her pearls gleaming, her posture perfect, her face unreadable, and for one brief, unguarded moment, her blue eyes glistened with something that might have been recognition, or regret, or the ghost of a young woman in a borrowed dress who had once been told she wasn't enough. She said nothing. She turned and walked back toward the ballroom, her heels clicking against the marble with a rhythm that sounded, for the first time, slightly uncertain. Alexander returned to Elena. She was standing exactly where he had left her, the untouched champagne in her hand, the red dress glowing under the chandeliers, her eyes finding his across the room with an expression that dared him to disappoint her. He didn't speak. He took the champagne glass from her hand, set it on the nearest table, and extended his open palm toward her. An invitation. Not a contract. Not a clause. Just a hand, open and empty and asking. Elena looked at his palm. She looked at his face. She saw the fear in it, and the hope, and the desperate sincerity of a man who was finally trying to speak a language he had never learned. She placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, and the touch, the first real, deliberate, unhidden touch between them, sent a current through both of them that had nothing to do with electricity and everything to do with the terrifying, exhilarating, irreversible moment when two people stop pretending. He pulled her gently onto the dance floor. The band was playing something slow and aching, and Alexander held her close. Closer than the first dance, closer than protocol, closer than either of them had been to anyone in a very long time. His lips brushed her ear. "I'm going to destroy that contract," he whispered. "Tonight, when we get home. Every page." Elena pulled back just enough to look at him. Her amber eyes searched his, looking for the lie, the loophole, the fine print. She found nothing but a man, undone and undefended, offering her the only thing he had left that was worth anything. "And then what?" she asked. "And then I ask you to stay. Not as Party B, not as my employee, not as anything with terms and conditions." His voice cracked on the last word, and he didn't try to hide it. "Just stay, and let me figure out how to deserve it." Elena didn't answer. Not with words. She rested her head against his chest, and she let him hold her, and the ballroom spun around them in a blur of crystal and gold and music, and for the first time in 11 months, the distance between them was exactly 0. Across the room, Victoria Blackwell watched from behind her champagne glass. Her face was stone, but her hand, the one holding the glass, the one wearing the diamond ring from a marriage that had also begun with borrowed dresses and impossible odds, was trembling. The ride back from the Whitfield Hotel was silent in the way that only truly significant silences can be. Not empty, but full. Overfull. A silence packed so tightly with unspoken things that any word would have shattered it like a hammer through stained glass. Thomas drove with his eyes fixed on the road, and his professional discretion operating at maximum capacity. In the back seat, Alexander and Elena sat 12 inches apart, and neither of them closed the gap, because both of them understood that what was happening between them had entered a territory where a single wrong move could unravel everything. Elena's hand rested on the leather seat between them. Alexander's hand rested beside it. Their pinkies were almost touching. Almost. The ghost of contact. The same phantom closeness that had defined their entire relationship persisted even now, even after the dance, even after the whispered promise, as if their bodies had been rehearsing distance for so long that proximity required a kind of courage that couldn't be summoned all at once. The car pulled into the underground garage of the Blackwell building at 11:42. Thomas opened the door. Elena stepped out first, the red silk of her dress catching the fluorescent garage light and turning it into something warmer than it deserved to be. Alexander followed. They walked to the private elevator in silence, stood side by side as it ascended 47 floors, and said nothing as the doors opened onto the penthouse foyer. The apartment was dark. The Manhattan skyline provided the only light, a cold blue-white glow that turned the marble floors into mirrors and the furniture into shadows. Elena stood in the entryway, her heels on the threshold between the elevator and the foyer, suspended between the world she had come from and the one she was being asked to enter. Alexander walked into the study without turning on the lights. She heard the sound of a drawer opening, the rustle of paper, and then he reappeared holding the leather folder. The contract, 9 pages, $3 million, 11 months of cowardice bound in legal formatting and serif font. He held it out to her, not offering it, surrendering it. "I want you to do it," he said. "I don't have the right." Elena took the folder. It was heavier than she remembered, or maybe she was just more aware now of what it weighed, not in paper and ink, but in presumption, in fear, in the grotesque arithmetic of a man who had tried to purchase what could only be given freely. She opened it. The pages glowed faintly in the city light. She saw her name, Elena Sofia Moreno, Party B. And for a moment she heard the echo of Victoria's voice at the gala, the word staff landing like a blade, and she felt the old fury rise again. But fury was not what she needed now. Fury was the easy thing. The hard thing, the brave thing, was what came after. She tore the first page in half. The sound was sharp and clean, like a bone breaking and resetting at the same time. She tore the second page, the third, each rip deliberate, unhurried, ceremonial. Alexander watched her with an expression that shifted with every torn page. Relief, then grief, then something raw and desperate that had no name in any language he spoke. When she reached the last page, the signature page, the one with the blank line where her name was supposed to go, she paused. She looked at it for a long time. Then she looked at Alexander. "This is what you were going to ask me to sign." Her voice was quiet but precise. "This line right here. You were going to stand in this room and ask me to write my name on a document that turned me into a transaction. Yes. And you thought I would say yes. No." His voice broke on the word. "I hoped you would say no. I hoped you would tear it up and scream at me and walk out and force me to do what I should have done from the beginning, which was stand in front of you with nothing, no contract, no money, no leverage, and just tell you the truth. Then why didn't you?" Alexander pressed his palms against his eyes the way Elena had done in the staff bathroom the night she found the photograph. The same gesture, the same pressure, the same attempt to hold something together that was cracking from the inside. "Because the truth doesn't have a termination clause," he said. "If I gave you a contract and you rejected it, I could survive that. Contracts get rejected. Deals fall through. It's business. But if I told you what I actually feel and you looked at me the way you look at the marble when you're cleaning it, functional, indifferent, just another surface, I would not have recovered from that. I am not brave enough for that kind of rejection, Elena. I never have been." Elena stared at him. The last page of the contract was still in her hands, the blank signature line catching the light. She thought about her mother, who had married a man with nothing and loved him until the nothing killed him. She thought about Rico, who had built an entire life in a country that didn't want him using nothing but his hands and his stubbornness. She thought about herself, the girl who had crossed a border with a phone number and a promise, who had scrubbed floors and swallowed pride and saved every dollar and never, not once, let anyone see her cry. She thought about all the ways she had survived by keeping people at a distance, and she thought about how exhausting it was, how lonely, how the armor she had built to protect herself had become so thick that she sometimes couldn't feel her own heartbeat through it. She tore the last page. The pieces fluttered to the marble floor like confetti at a funeral for something that should never have been born. "There," she said, "it's done." Alexander looked at the torn paper on the floor. Then he looked at her. His eyes were red. His hands were at his sides, open, empty, offering nothing because he had nothing left to offer except himself, which he had never considered enough. "Elena, I'm not finished." She stepped toward him, and the click of her heels on the marble echoed through the dark penthouse like a heartbeat. "You want me to stay? You said it on the dance floor. You said let me figure out how to deserve it. So I'm going to tell you what that looks like, because you clearly need instructions that aren't drafted by a lawyer. Despite everything, the gravity of the moment, the torn contract on the floor, the 11 months of silence and longing and missed connections, the corner of Alexander's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile. The ghost of one. The promise of one. "You don't introduce me as your maid. Not tomorrow. Not ever. That chapter is over. It's over. You don't hide me. Not from your mother, not from the press, not from anyone. If you're ashamed of where I come from, then this ends right now. I have never been ashamed of you. I have only ever been ashamed of myself. You meet my brother, Rico. He's going to hate you on principle, and you're going to let him because he's earned the right to be protective and you haven't earned the right to be offended. I'll bring whiskey. He drinks beer, cheap beer, from a can. I'll bring beer." Elena took another step. They were close now. Close enough that she could see the faint scar on his eyebrow, the slight tremor in his lower lip, the way his pupils had dilated until his blue-gray eyes were almost black. Close enough to touch. And this time, there was no counter between them. No tray in her hands, no uniform, no hierarchy. No 9-page document defining the terms of their proximity. "And you never, never try to buy what I'm giving you for free. Not with contracts. Not with money. Not with dresses or penthouses or gestures designed to make me feel indebted. What I give you, I give because I choose to. And what I don't give, you wait for. Are we clear? Crystal. Good. Elena exhaled. The fury was gone. The armor was down. What remained was something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in so long that it almost hurt. Not the phantom heat of a hand that never touched her shoulder, but the real, present, undeniable warmth of standing in front of someone who saw her completely and wanted her anyway. Now, she said, and her voice softened for the first time all night, losing its edges, becoming something tender and terrified and brave. You can say what you've been trying to say for 11 months. Alexander Blackwell, the man who controlled empires, who commanded boardrooms, who had never in his adult life been at a loss for words in any negotiation, any pitch, any confrontation, looked at Elena Moreno and found that his entire vocabulary had abandoned him. Every language he spoke, every rhetorical strategy he had mastered, every eloquent phrase he had ever deployed to bend the world to his will, gone, evaporated, useless. What came out instead was the simplest, most unadorned, most terrifyingly honest sentence he had ever spoken. I love you. I loved you before I knew your last name. I loved you when you arranged flowers in my hallway and didn't look at me. I loved you when you called me a coward because you were right and no one in my life has ever respected me enough to be that honest. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be what you deserve. But I am asking you, not party A to party B, not employer to employee, just me, just Alexander, just this, to let me try. The penthouse was silent. Manhattan hummed 47 floors below, indifferent as ever, a city of 8 million people who would never know that in a glass box above their heads. A man had just said the only words that mattered, and a woman was deciding whether to believe them. Elena reached up and touched his face. Her fingers, the same fingers that had scrubbed his floors, folded his towels, arranged his flowers, gripped the edge of his sink in fury, torn his contract to pieces, traced the line of his jaw, the scar on his eyebrow, the corner of his mouth. He closed his eyes at her touch and a shudder passed through him that he couldn't control and didn't try to. You're going to be terrible at this, she whispered. Probably. You're going to say the wrong thing and make decisions without asking me and buy something expensive, when what I actually need is for you to just sit with me and be quiet. Almost certainly. And I'm going to be difficult. I'm going to fight you on everything, because I've been taking care of myself my whole life and I don't know how to let someone else do it. I'm going to push you away when I'm scared and then be angry that you left. I won't leave. You don't know that. No. But I know that I've spent 11 months trying to stay away from you, and I failed every single day. So the odds are in your favor. Elena's thumb rested on his lower lip. His breath was warm against her hand. The city light painted them both in silver and shadow. And in this moment, this precise, unrepeatable, trembling moment, they were not a billionaire and a maid, not party A and party B, not a man with too much power and a woman with too much pride. They were just two people standing at the edge of something enormous, looking down and deciding to jump. Ask me again, she said. Stay. Ask me like you mean it. Alexander opened his eyes. He took her face in both hands, gently, as if she were something that could break, and firmly as if she were something he would never let go. And he pressed his forehead against hers. Stay, Elena. Stay and ruin my life. Stay and make it impossible for me to ever go back to the version of myself that existed before you walked into my kitchen and didn't look at me. Stay and let me be terrified and clumsy and wrong, and stay anyway, because I would rather be wrong with you than right with anyone else for the rest of my life. Elena closed her eyes. A single tear escaped, the first she had allowed since the night she crossed the border, since the night she promised herself she would never cry in a country that hadn't earned her tears. It slid down her cheek and onto his thumb, and he held it there like it was something sacred. Yes, she said. The word was small, barely a syllable, but it filled the penthouse from floor to ceiling, from wall to wall, from the marble foyer to the glass windows overlooking a city that had never cared about either of them and never would. It didn't need to. They had each other now, and that was a country unto itself. Alexander kissed her. Not the way billionaires kiss in movies. Not cinematic, not choreographed, not accompanied by swelling violins. He kissed her the way a drowning man breathes when he finally breaks the surface. Desperate, grateful, shaking, alive. And Elena kissed him back with 11 months of silence and fury, and longing compressed into a single act of surrender that was, in fact, the bravest thing either of them had ever done. When they finally pulled apart, foreheads still touching, breathing each other's air, Elena looked down at the torn contract scattered across the marble floor. 9 pages, $3 million. The most expensive love letter ever written, now in pieces at their feet. "You owe me a new contract," she murmured against his lips. He pulled back slightly, confused. "What?" "Not that kind." Her amber eyes found his, and in them, behind the exhaustion, behind the tears, behind the armor she had finally set down, was a warmth that could have powered every light in Manhattan. The kind that doesn't have a termination clause. Alexander's breath caught. Then he smiled. Not the boardroom smile, not the gala smile, not any of the smiles he had learned to perform for an audience. A real smile. Crooked, imperfect, startled by its own existence, as if the muscles in his face were remembering a movement they had forgotten long ago. "That," he said, "I can do." Elena leaned into him. His arms closed around her, the red dress pressed against his black shirt, silk against cotton, warmth against warmth. Below them, Manhattan pulsed and glittered and rushed forward into a future that didn't belong to them. But this moment did. This room, this silence, this fragile, extraordinary, hard-won thing between them that had no clauses, no conditions, no expiration date. Just two hands, finally touching. No longer by accident. $3 million, 9 pages, and none of it mattered. Because love doesn't have a price tag, and it definitely doesn't have a termination clause. If this story made you feel something, you already know what to do. Like, subscribe, hit that bell, and I'll see you in the next one. Because trust me, it's going to be just as intense.